the moment, part of this, the trade-off we're having over defence spending is that people don't want to, it's the old guns for butter argument. And you have to break that circle somehow. You can say stuff about the threat, and you can maybe say how poor British military capability is in relation to that threat, but it doesn't seem to cut through.
First of all, we'll be joined by Mike Martin in just a few moments' time, but I'd just like the Adam Boulton take on what we had of the announcement of the Defence Investment Plan by Keir Starmer. There was an extra £1.5 billion found. It's now at £15 billion, but it appears that £4.7 billion is up to Andy Burnham to find. Something like 1.8 needs to come from his first budget. So within months of becoming Prime Minister, he's really got to get this sorted. He starts in deficit.
Yes, and we haven't heard much from Andy Burnham about this today, not surprisingly. He hasn't got a Chancellor in place yet either. Clearly, it was a hostile hospital pass from Sir Keir Starmer. And of course...
You think it was purposefully hostile?
Oh, absolutely. I think, when you've got days to go, with a big fanfare, you announce a plan and then you don't fund it. It's clearly, designed to make life awkward for your successor. So... and of course, what we all have to remember is even if the headline figure had gone up from the 13 and something billion which made John Healey resign, it was still only approaching 15 billion. And even that was nowhere near the 3% promised, as a commitment of GDP by the end of this Parliament. So... Andy Burnham has got a big headache on defence. Apparently, reports from the Burnham campus saying that he wasn't, this wasn't spelt out to him when he said go ahead with it. That said, I think it's quite clear that the Starmer government has been floundering in this area ever since the Defence Review, which they initiated, basically points to a very dramatic increase in spending. They haven't found the answers. And the big picture will be, will Andy Burnham attempt to find the answers, or will he basically carry on waffling like Keir Starmer?
Yes, it is a bit of a nightmare for Andy Burnham. Let's get into the detail of it and more of the fallout with Mike Martin, who is the Liberal Democrat MP for Tunbridge Wells, a former British Army officer. Mike, good evening to you.
Good evening.
Starmer spent the day then defending his defence investment plan. There's an extra 15 billion in there. Only just over 10 billion is actually funded, though. One Burnham ally has likened it to an unexploded bomb that awaits the arrival of Andy Burnham when he takes up the seat at number 10 Downing Street. Starmer's reasoning is that it'll come from fiscal headroom, which economists are saying this evening is actually going to force Burnham to break fiscal rules. If this is to come from headroom, there maybe isn't as much as £22 billion there anyway, since it was laid out by Rachel Reeves, that actually you are, forcing Andy Burnham to break the rules. It is impossible for him no matter what way he turns.
Look, that's pretty hard to say without seeing the Treasury analysis. The 22 billion that Rachel Reeves set out as fiscal headroom in the last budget, one assumes most of that's gone with the Iran war, right? That's put huge pressure on all of our spending and also on government spending as well.
And there's been help for energy bills, hasn't there?
Interest rates have gone up, help for energy bills, all that kind of stuff. So one assumes that's gone. I agree with Adam. This is a hospital pass, but I think it's actually worse than... We've got this 5 billion that's missing, that's the hospital pass. There's also 10 billion of efficiency savings that need to be found. But actually, if you look at the whole 10-year plan, it splits into two parts. There's a bit up to 2030, and then there's the bit beyond 2030. And only the first bit is covered by the current spending review. The next bit, beyond 2030, where 2/3 of the investments fall, so they've pushed a lot of stuff to the right, a lot of the heavy investments in defence come after 2030. None of that is funded because the next spending review hasn't happened, and that's on Burnham. So that's actually the biggest hospital pass.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It seems to me that Andy Burnham is in a position where, before the next election, but probably quite urgently, he's really going to have to scrap this and come up with his own defence investment plan. Would you agree?
Well, yeah, he might do, but the problem is the threats aren't going away. And as many other people have made the comment, we should think about how this is viewed in the Kremlin, and we should also think about how this is viewed amongst our allies. Principally Washington, right? And even if the US is disengaging from Europe, we still get lots of other things from our relationship with them, and we need to be a kind of minimally credible defense partner to get those things.
No,
So,
I wasn't suggesting that he needs to have another defence review or anything else. I mean, I think I just meant pretty promptly he will find himself having to turn around on a lot of issues. And perhaps that could be the silver lining of all this, that he's able to say to the British public, look, the money isn't there for what we need to do, because presumably Keir Starmer is going to have a pretty torrid time in Ankara next week at the NATO summit.
look, the one thing we do know about Andy Burnham is he's very good at U-turns. I suspect actually that the Ankara summit, this debate that we're having in the UK, may well get, it's a national debate. There's quite a lot of detail in it about spending reviews and all the rest of it. And I suspect that actually maybe Keir Starmer has done enough to get through that summit. I think the big debate is the domestic one that we have about how we fund a credible defence force. And I mean, this has been a catastrophic failure of statecraft from the Labour team, where they divorced the Strategic Defence Review, which came out a year ago. That was the vision for what the armed forces would look like. On itself, in and of itself, it was a good document. But they divorced that from this document, the DIP, the Defence Investment Plan, which was where the money was going to come from. And as soon as they divorced those two things, it meant that the Strategic Defence Review became a wish list that was effectively unfunded. And they've spent the last year arguing about where they can get the money from. I mean, I think I would liken it to the biggest failure of statecraft of this government in the entire 2 years that they've been in power.
Sorry, Mike. Do you think
No.
Keir Starmer should have come out 6 months ago and said, look, there's only one way to do this, and that is to cut into the welfare budget, to make it very clear and very simple? We can't defend ourselves to the point we need to be unless we cut into welfare. That if that was clean and clearly stated, that he would have been able to get away with it.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very good point. And I think, so to be clear, I think that the levels of funding required, which are akin to, 30 billion extra a year.
That's 25 billion, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you're to meet all the recommendations of
28,
the Strategic Defence Review.
So,
sorry, to get the figures right, because there's lots of figures banded around. The MOD wanted £28 billion extra for this period. If you're to meet the commitment, the NATO commitment, by 2035, you've got to look at an uplift of at least 25 billion a year, I think it is. So those are the kind of figures we're looking at. That seems impossible. Hitting the NATO target seems impossible at the moment.
Let's call it between 25 and 30, because our current defence budget is about 60 billion, and it's a 50% increase to get up to that NATO target. And arguably, if you look at what was laid out in the Strategic Defence Review, we need to start hitting that figure now of 3.5 rather than in the future. So to come back to your welfare question, because I think it's really important, because it's, this is this narrative that's taken hold in British politics. Absolutely, there are savings to be made in welfare. I think it's really noticeable that Ed Davey, who has a son who is on PIP, right? His son is disabled, receives personal independence payments. So they are a family that benefit from the benefit system. He has said there is a huge amount of fraud and waste, particularly in disability benefits, and that needs to be tackled. But I think that the levels that you can get from, for example, switching from telephone interviews to face-to-face interviews, it cuts out a lot of fraud, and other methods that you clamp down on fraud using AI and so on and so forth, that's not going to get you up to your 60 billion. And if you look at the reforms that the Starmer government tried to bring in and failed, they were bringing in about 5 billion. So it's helpful, but doesn't really touch the sides. And I think also we should, it's probably worth saying as well, when we talk about welfare, that's a huge budget, of which a large proportion of that is state pensions. So people have saved for those all their lives. We're not going to touch those. There's a much smaller...
that brings you, doesn't it, to the triple lock?
It does.
And you might touch the triple lock, which I think people are saying that over this period it would save something like 25 billion.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, the pension would still be going up. It just wouldn't be going up by as much.
What do you think, Mike?
Another live. Well, I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna comment. As you know, all of the parties at the moment are talking about protecting the triple lock, and we're really proud. As Lib Dems, that was our policy, right? That was our policy that we brought into the coalition negotiations, and the reason we did that was because pensioner poverty was a huge issue at the end of the noughties, the beginning of the 2010s.
Yeah, but it was a corrective measure so pensions caught up, and arguably they've caught up now. So
and I think that there's merit to that argument. At the moment, the position of all the parties is that it should be maintained. Clearly, it's under review, and all the parties are looking at it. Exactly what the position is going to be at the next election. I mean, you would forgive me for not talking about our manifesto 3 years before the election, but good try.
Do you think, I mean, we know that one of Burnham's likely soon-to-be economic advisors has said we need to look at the triple lock. It is, something we understand those close to Burnham are keen to look at, where it was always outright just any change to the triple lock was ruled out under Starmer. Do you think that there needs to be a conversation about re-looking at it sooner rather than later? I know you don't want to commit in terms of the party, but, personally, do we need to have a frank conversation about this sooner rather than later? Because if it's not welfare, then it needs to be the triple lock part of welfare, I suppose.
Sure. Look, Kate, there is already a conversation about the triple lock, both we're having one now in the media and also inside parties, inside all of the parties. When I speak to MPs from other parties or other Lib Dem MPs, these are conversations that we're having. All of us in the 2024 election stood on a manifesto that protected the triple lock. So the triple lock is protected for the duration of this parliament. Exactly what we go into for the next election, what our manifesto will be then, or what the manifesto of the other parties will be, I think will be a result of those conversations. But we are quite some way away from the next general election. But you're absolutely right. It is a conversation that's being had right now. Indeed, we are contributing to that conversation.
Stick with us, Mike. We've got some other bits to play out from Prime Minister's questions. Let's just go to that. Kemi Baynock didn't hold her punches, despite it being Starmer's penultimate Wednesday at the dispatch box. The Times got a mention as well today. Have a listen.
It is a total dereliction of duty, and I'm not the only one who thinks so. The Times newspaper said today the Prime Minister's legacy... well, why don't we wait and see what they said? That the Prime Minister's legacy is betrayal, failure and vulnerability. And that's one of the nicer headlines.
That is reference to the £5 billion black hole that Starmer has left Andy Burnham. Meanwhile, Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats, had this to say.
Yet the Prime Minister has rejected our proposals for defence bonds, which were used in the past to rearm our country. So can the Prime Minister tell us why has he chosen to leave our country so vulnerable to missile attack?
I've given you an open goal here for defence bonds, haven't I, Mike Martin?
Well, I think, to be honest, if you're looking at plugging holes in defence, that's how you do it. And this is and you can give these things. I mean, we've done this before, right? We did this in the Second World War, First World War.
Yeah.
This is kind of pretty traditional, and you can structure them. You can give them a tax treatment. So let's say, for example, this is not party policy, but I'm just painting a picture for you. Let's say you make them free from inheritance tax, and therefore British citizens will want to hold these, right? Rather than corporations. It doesn't hold it. There's no benefit for a corporation to hold it. And so, I'd buy £1,000 of them. You'd get lots of politicians buying them, and it raises money for defence. It's within the fiscal rules, the amounts we're talking about. We're talking about £20 billion or so this year.
How many people would have to buy £1,000 worth in order to get what you...
Now you're asking me to do mental maths on live radio. So
how much are we asking for, Mike?
20 billion.
20 billion. All right.
Yeah.
You carry on talking and I'll get my calculator out.
But other people would buy more, right? Is if you make it, for example, if you take that idea and make it free of inheritance tax, people might stick £10,000 in it, £100,000. And it has this other benefit as well. Of course, it raises the money. But what it also does is it starts a conversation about defence and security, this so-called national conversation that the government talked about starting in its strategic defence review but never did. And that's really important because at the moment, part of this the trade-off we're having over defence spending is that people don't want to, it's the old guns for butter argument. And you have to break that circle somehow. You can say stuff about the threat, and you can maybe say how poor British military capability is in relation to that threat, but it doesn't seem to cut through. And you probably need to do something to get the public to start talking about defence. And if you've got a bunch of, call it influencers in modern parlance, but leaders, politicians, notable I'm sure Adam, I'm sure you would buy defence bonds. It's a patriotic thing to do. We're supporting the defence and security of our country, and that starts a conversation.
Yeah, Starmer says it's just borrowing by another name, and 20 million people, if we're to average this out, 20 million people would have to buy £1,000 of defence bonds each to get to your 20 billion. 20 million of us. Adam?
Well, that's quite a high proportion. I mean, I think the idea of defence bonds is quite attractive, but I think it's arguable. I'm not an economist, so, well, I'm only partly qualified. I'm not going to argue about this, but there are those who say that this is not within the fiscal rules, that it is simply increasing borrowing. There is another point about this, Mr. Martin, which is that there are also some quite serious politicians and defence experts who say, and I think this was a bit behind what the Prime Minister was saying in his statement yesterday, that this isn't just about setting a target for spending, because, the Ministry of Defence will happily spend the money, but actually the record shows they don't tend to spend it very wisely. So... Yeah. Perhaps limiting the amount of money and making them, if you like, choose between more Navy ships and drones is, a valuable exercise to concentrate the minds.
Yeah, I think, Adam, I think you're absolutely right. I guess what I would say is it's not either or. It's not less money, more money, or sort out the procurement system. It's both. We need a root and branch, a radical shift in how we do procurement, as well as more money. And there's a number, we have a bit of an opportunity at the moment, actually, because there's a sort of historic shift from big, exquisite platforms like destroyers and fighter jets and submarines and these long, that you do with big defense firms like BAE or Thales or Raytheon, and you sign a contract for 20 years and they deliver you, 1,000 pieces of kit in 10 years time, and it's a long development, and that's traditionally how we've done procurement. And those contracts traditionally overrun because the government adds on more things that it wants that kit to do, or it delays them, and the contracts aren't written particularly well from the point of view of the government in the first place. But actually what's happening now is a lot of kit. We still need some kit procured like that, like submarines. We still need submarines. The only way to procure them is like that. But actually a lot of our kit now is, so look at drones, for example. They have a procurement cycle of 6 weeks because the technology is changing so fast. And in the support that we've done to Ukraine, so we have this thing called Op Kindred, which is how we procure equipment for Ukraine. And that has an incredibly fast procurement cycle, and it innovates very rapidly to keep up with the pace of drone development. And that's a model for how to do procurement for an increasing amount of defense equipment, which is high tech, lots of small bits of kit rather than very large single bits of kit like submarines and warships. Okay. And so we do have a bit of a model, and we just need to really kind of root and branch reform the old model, downsize it because it's procuring a lot less of our spend, and scale up the model that works very well in Kindred. It also worked in Afghanistan when we had urgent operational requirements where I served. Stuff would come out to the front lines very quickly because we had British soldiers that would die otherwise.
Mike, food for thought. Thank you for being with us. Really appreciate it. Mike Martin, Liberal Democrat MP for Tunbridge Wells, former British Army officer, and of course sits on the Defence Select Committee. Mike, thank you.